It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the show that has spent the last year bringing sexy back to the Atheist Community of Austin on YouTube, Spreaker, and everywhere fine podcasts are podcasted. I'm Christy Powell. Joining me now and always for this special celebration is my formerly and freshly minted co-host, Bianca. V, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing amazing, Christy.
Great, glad to hear it. Well, tonight we'll be looking ahead to the future of the show, giving you sort of a preview of coming attractions and talking about sort of all of our hopes and dreams as we draw close to our first year here on the Atheist Experience Network. Phone lines are already open. If you have any questions, sexy or serious, or want to talk about what you'd like to see or what you'd like to hope for the next year of the show, give us a call at 512-686-0279. V, what are you most looking forward to this year?
I am looking forward to the Bat Cruise that's happening.
Yeah, coming up September 21st. Get your tickets now. There's going to be a free lecture with Dave Warnock and others being lined up. And then we have our huge Bat Cruise. Those tickets are just $30 at bit.ly/Bat Cruise. Definitely a good time and worth checking out. You're going to be there?
I'm totally going to be there.
Absolutely. It's kind of the only time in the year that everybody from within the ACA, everybody who is out of town, everybody who's interested, all the friends, and everybody who just makes this place work can actually get together and meet each other IRL, without the avatars and the chat links and everything else.
I'm excited. It's going to be my first year doing it, so I'm super excited to network and meet a bunch of folks.
So it's absolutely a good time. We also have some incredibly exciting shows coming up this September. What are you looking forward to?
Well, September 5th, we've got Dr. Dale Ray coming back on talking about pseudoscience, and he's going to be walking us through a version of his Reclaiming Your Sexuality workshop that's going to be premiering at the Recovering from Religion Fall Excursion. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get a sneak peek of that. Yeah,
Recovery from Religion, a fascinating organization. I know a lot of folks watching right now have been really helped by the types of services that they offer, and this is sort of their big intensive. So excited to hear just a small preview, the stuff that they're going to be doing. Following that, on September 12th, we've got Dr. Eric Sprankle. I guarantee, even if you have no idea who that is, if you are on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, you've seen his tweets. And I know that that's a little crazy to say. He's very successful on Twitter as Dr. Sprankle. He is a associate professor at Minnesota State University, is in the clinical psychology department and studies sexuality. But his tweets about sex and social justice and just some of the craziness in our culture have really caught on like wildfire. So it'll be very exciting to have a conversation with him, and we hope that you'll join us for that. And then we're coming up on the week of our Bat Cruise.
Yeah, the week of the Bat Cruise. As we said, Dave Warnock is going to be back, and with him is going to be Marie Delafont, who was on Secular Sexuality a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So she's going to be back, and we're going to be having Ladies' Night with her, and Mandisa Thomas going to be calling in. Or is she going to be here?
No, yeah, she'll be joining us online, actually.
Okay,
unfortunately,
perfect.
not able to make it to the Bat Cruise.
Okay, well, we're going to have a fun conversation among us girls. We're going to kick you out of the studio.
Yeah, you know what? I've been doing this for the last year, and my feet hurt, so happy to cede my mic and let the ladies have a night with it. But not before we get back on September 26th with Dr. Susie Block. If you watched HBO after midnight at any point in the 80s or 90s, you're likely familiar with Dr. Susie. Her book, The Bonobo Way, has been an incredibly fascinating journey for me over the past couple of months as I've been going through that and talking about it with clients. And we're going to be just talking with her about, again, how to unleash our sexuality and make these different parts of ourselves more open. So really excited about some of the big names we have coming through and all the things we have lined up. After that, in October, we've got Dr. David Lay, a name that I've referenced on this show many, many times. So very excited to meet a couple of my heroes. So thank you all so much for making that possible, for joining us and allowing us to have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and in addition to all of those folks, we're always looking for interesting people to have on air. We'd love to hear from you, the types of things that you'd like to see, or if you yourself or someone you know has a unique or interesting perspective on sexuality, or how our sexuality is affected by this sort of Judeo-Christian culture that we're all swimming in. We'd love to hear from you. In the past, we've had folks like nurses and burlesque performers and phone sex operators. I mean, doctors, lawyers, business executives, the whole gambit. And so if you or anybody else you know is a model or performer, a Hooters waitress, or a pageant contestant, dungeon master, any of that great kind of stuff, we would love to hear from you. Shoot us an email. That's sex@atheist-community.org. We would love to hear from you about the show and about what kinds of things you'd like to see moving forward. We try to think of this show as offering normalization, education, and entertainment on sexual topics through a lens of skeptical and positive atheism. And we would love to hear what that means to you and what we can be doing to make this an interesting and fun place to be every Thursday night. So thank you to everybody who's joining us. Again, we'd love to hear from you. We're at 512-686-0279, 512-686-0279.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
I guess today we're just going to kind of have a conversation and reintroduce ourselves as we enter this new secular millennia.
Yeah, kind of stepping into the next phase. There's just so much to be excited about, but I think it's a good moment to kind of, I guess, look back at maybe the roots of, of what we've accomplished in the past year, and to get excited about where we'd like to go and what we want all of this to mean and to look like moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I'll start by maybe asking you a couple questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So I'm going to pretend I don't know you for a minute. Hello there. My
Howdy.
name's V.
Thanks
How
so
are
much
you?
for joining
Thank
me, for
you.
joining the show and just being a part of what we're doing here.
So I guess you bring the sexuality and sex education aspect to the show.
Yeah, I do. I bring
Oh,
the
yeah.
sexy to the show.
Woo.
Yeah.
So how do you see the intersection of kind of applied skepticism to what you bring to both your clients and your work outside of the show, and also to listeners on the show? How does that kind of interact with the therapy that you do?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's impossible to talk about sexuality without also talking about religion and culture and all, because all of these things are unfortunately inextricably linked. So regardless of whether the person who's coming into my therapy office, the person who's watching this show, has been an atheist their whole lives, has, not a whole lot of feelings or a lot of trauma about religion, the reality is that it's affecting all of us. And so there's a lot to tackle there, and it's definitely something to take very seriously.
Right. No, that makes sense. I know that a lot of clients, and probably a lot of listeners as well, kind of tend to approach sexuality and concepts like love and pleasure from a kind of woo perspective, or a perspective that maybe isn't hinged on logic and science, because those kind of seem like antonyms sometimes.
Sure.
So I guess how do you engage with those clients or those listeners, those people who kind of need that perspective in order to kind of get the concepts?
Yeah, and we are working in this field. I mean, you and I as educators, myself as a therapist, we're talking about humans and humanity. And aside from height and weight and cholesterol counts, there's not a lot of good metrics, particularly when we're talking about sexuality and love and these really unmeasurable things. So, it's about kind of meeting people where they are. That's a big part of it. And providing a little bit of education where appropriate, giving people an opportunity to maybe develop that vocabulary, to step away from sort of these beliefs, a lot of times these beliefs have never been challenged. They're just assumptions that people stick with because they think that that's the way it has to be, because that's the way it's always been.
Right.
So it really does mean a lot of just sort of recognizing that when people use these sort of like magical terms and they're talking about their soulmates and they're talking about, loving somebody with all their heart, and they don't necessarily challenge these assumptions because they're so built into our worldview. So even just letting somebody know that, hey, you don't have one soulmate.
Right.
There's no empirical data to support the notion that there are 7 billion people on the planet and 3 billion of them are meant to partner up with another 3 billion, and then some people just get left out, and that's how. There's no reason to believe that. And yet that's sort of the ridiculous myth that so many of us carry secretly inside of us.
Oh, yeah, because, the way you talk about things matters. So even if you don't, even if you've never sat down and formulated a theory about soulmates, if that's the term you've heard your whole life, you're going to, I don't know.
Yeah, and when you describe it in that absurd way,
right,
that there's no reason to think that 3 billion people would end up with 3, when you put it in those terms, people are, of course, like, well, of course I don't believe that. But you have to actually say those words.
Right, okay, then how would it work?
Yeah, to sort of start that pattern. And so there's a lot of that. And then there's a lot of sort of acceptance, not letting the perfect become the enemy of the good. Giving people an opportunity to take their own journeys and sort of grow on their own, to reach things at their own pace, and to just facilitate that, recognizing that as much as I like to rely on the empirical research, the well-defined data, the evidence-based and supported therapies, the reality is there's a lot of shooting from the hip. That's sort of the nature of the world, and no matter how much of an expert I struggle or strive to be, and how much I look up to, many of the experts we have on this show, many of the experts that I know in my real life, they're all making it up as they go along too, to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. A lot of the you can make a lot of progress with somebody without being so nitpicky that you tear down every time they use an esoteric word.
Exactly, yeah.
So you need to pick your battles, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And I do respect other people's beliefs, because I know that as much as I may have studied this and may be like the expert in the room, maybe not in most rooms, but at least in the therapy room, I usually know more about sexuality and these different ideas. But even then, I don't know everything, and I certainly don't pretend to. And so when somebody comes in, whether I am working with a client who does have a faith background, or, I've made it very clear on this show, we've talked a good number of times about sex addiction as a concept,
right,
and how deeply flawed and yet pervasive that idea is in my field. And so if I have a client who comes in claiming to be a sex addict, I'm not going to, take a research paper and rub their nose in it or roll it up and hit them like a new dog in a newspaper.
Right.
I'm happy to meet people where they're at and happy to accept what they believe. If they come in and all they want to talk about is their relationship with their parents, and they casually mention that they, believe homosexuality is a sin, for instance, there are certain things that I am willing to challenge as we develop a relationship, and I want to
make a note of that. And
go
back later.
Little bit. Some of the time. Certainly there are lines too far. There are places I'm not willing to go with a client, and things I'm not willing to just take at face value. And you see that on this show. I'm willing to let people kind of bring in some ridiculousness on some calls and push back only as I feel like they're able to hear it.
Yeah. So speaking of previous calls that you've had,
sure.
What are some of the calls, or maybe some of the common denominators between calls that you found have been the most challenging? So when someone calls in with a certain type of question, what kind of question have you gotten the most that you've had to really just kind of hammer away at it.
Yeah. So the nature of this show, I mean, we're a YouTube channel. We are not a government health organization. We are not a hospital. There are just inherent limitations to what we do, and that's not to say that we can't do meaningful work, that people aren't having their lives affected by programs like this.
Right.
I know my personal life was dramatically changed by, in particular, the Savage Love Cast, which we've kind of referenced a couple times on this show, and a number of other great podcasts and programs. And, I aspire to be at all in that vein. And so I do feel like there's meaningful work to be done, but every once in a while, we will get a call from somebody who says, I'm having trouble finding a girlfriend. And you're like, okay, we can talk about that. And then it very quickly becomes apparent that this is somebody who's struggling with incredible depression, incredible feelings of loneliness, struggles with social skills, struggles with holding down a job, and all of these different things. And, talking about how to write a pithy and clever Tinder message is not going to be the solution for that person.
Right, exactly.
And so those are the calls that break my heart a little bit, because as a therapist, as a human being, those are the people that I want to take out for a hamburger and just talk about their life and see what we can do, but certainly not the type of thing that is going to make for educational, entertaining programming, and certainly not the type of thing that we're going to be able to change or fix in a meaningful way over the course of a phone call.
Right. Do you find that there's anything that people in your fields in general do that could maybe be benefited by a tactic that maybe we've adopted on the show or that you adopt in your practice?
Yeah, honestly, whether it's this show or another one like it, I just wish that every therapist out there was listening to something about sex, because the truth is, like in many human service fields, whether we're talking about, even your gynecologist, your general practitioner, your psychiatrist, your therapist, your social worker, very few of these people are getting significant, comprehensive, meaningful sex education. The reality is many of them may not have gone beyond, rolling a condom over a banana in their high school health class. And because I live in Texas, I know that it's super possible to graduate high school with I've never done that. So I just wish that people would do anything, really just to start with, even if you're a generalist, even if you don't work specifically or particularly with the queer community, for instance, or on sexual issues, on issues of out-of-control sexual behavior, even if that's not what you're doing, even if you are mostly prescribing, cholesterol medication as a general practitioner, and that's
right.
largely what you do, I would hope that people would begin to develop some specific understandings of the struggles that the queer community faces and those issues that are really directly connected to our sexuality.
Mm-hmm. I would even go so far as to say, I as a queer person, I understand that there are things that are specifically to do with the queer community,
Mm-hmm.
but I would even say, don't even make that distinction. Just include it all. It's like, this is just sex. It's not straight sex versus queer sex. It's just, this is.
Well, and that's a notion that we aspire to
right.
in the abstract. But the reality is so much of our culture is built around these heteronormative, monogamous ideas.
Really?
Shocker. If you're watching a program like this, I have to imagine that there's something drawing you in, because the reality is that sex looks kind of one way. Mm-hmm. In most people's minds, and that's not the way it actually looks for most people, or at least many people. And so while I'd like to think that a gay man and a gay woman and a straight man and these different folks would be able to go into a doctor and not have to have that aspect of their lives be relevant to their cholesterol or whatever else, the simple fact is that all providers, all human beings really, need to be cognizant of the particular struggles that are being faced by certain populations. And if you're queer in America right now, I'm excited that you have it better than you did 10 years ago, and certainly better than in the 80s. And, every 50 years on aggregate, things are very much moving in the right direction, and I think that's something to celebrate and be excited about. But I am not about to rest on our laurels or pretend that the job is done.
Oh, for sure. And I think that that's a really good thing that this show kind of offers is that reminder that we're not done yet. Like we're making progress and we're getting there, but it's slow going. And we do have to continue to have these conversations, even if sometimes we answer the same questions a couple of times, a couple of different ways. Every single call and every single question is helping move us forward.
That's certainly the notion. I mean, the Emancipation Proclamation did not ipso facto end slavery. I mean, there's certainly much more to it than that. Giving women the vote didn't make sexism just disappear and all of a sudden all women are completely equal to men. We fixed it. We can go home. That's just not the reality. You know, we can be excited about movements towards the curing of AIDS and things like Truvada, things like the Obergefell decision, the ending of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We can point and highlight all of these successes and be very excited about it, but that doesn't mean that trans folks aren't still getting kicked out of the military, getting beaten on a regular basis, that that lesbians are struggling to find acceptance for their relationships or for their sexuality. I mean, I could go on in so many ways. And so, yeah, the hope of a show like this is to just continue to move that needle, you know, to be pushing the envelope in some ways, while also just sort of taking a moment to bask in and celebrate all of this sexual freedom that I think so many of us have been deprived for so much of our lives. And that's true of I think, everybody watching. Certainly individual stories may differ, but whether you are gay, straight, trans, NB, I mean, all of these different descriptors or labels, there are systems of oppression found in religion and in our society and in our culture that are in many ways starting to crumble. And that's something to be excited about.
Indeed. Awesome.
So, yeah, I'm very excited, obviously, about the work that we do here, not the least of which is taking your calls. So thank you to the folks that have called in. We're going to go ahead and jump in with April. April, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. What can we do for you?
Well, I thought I would call in. I found this show through the Atheist Experience.
Great.
So obviously, I am an atheist. I grew up in small town Kentucky. Mm-hmm. My parents are involved in a religious cult. I grew up in that religious cult. They are part of the ministry. I was a musician from the time I was 10 years old in that cult. So I grew up with all of those religious ideas, you know, that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
All the heteronormative monogamy, all of those ideas were pounded into my brain. And, we listened to preachers talk about, if your son seemed to have a limp wrist, you should take him out and break his wrist. Those were things that were screamed across the pulpit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where I grew up. And
I've been in that barn or that living room or that high school gymnasium. It happens in churches too, but I mean, there's a lot of, invisible churches in that type of community. So I hear what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so altering for you when, I grew up with no TV. We weren't allowed to watch television. Mm-hmm. So by the time I was 12 years old, I had read thousands of books. And I think my parents didn't realize what a double-edged sword they had created.
Yeah. Yeah. Life finds a way.
You can analyze, right? And you have logic and reasoning and common sense, which is not quite so common, right? People tend to gloss over things they don't understand because they don't want anyone to know they don't understand it, so they just go with the norm, right?
Sure, yeah.
And that's how I grew up, even though by 9 years old, I knew I was different than the other girls in the church. Mm-hmm. That was the only people we were allowed to associate with. We were not allowed to associate with heathens and those outside of the cult. Yeah,
being in the world but not of it.
Right. Oh, that was preached every single sermon. Yeah. So at 9 years old, I'm like, why am I different than the other girls? Why am I so different? And fast forward, I started dating guys. Well, every time they would kiss me, it would disgust me so bad I would break up with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, it was just him. The next one won't be that way. Mm-hmm. But then it was. And that continued until I was 18. And my mother, I saw the look on her face one day when I broke up with this guy. He was a great guy, gorgeous guy, had everything going for him, was madly in love with me, and I dumped him for no reason. Mm-hmm. And my mom looks at me.
I'm starting to suspect there might be a reason. I don't want to spoil the ending of your story.
Yeah, right? But the wheels were turning in my mother's mind, and I could see where she was going, and it terrified me. Mm-hmm. Because I knew if they found out that I was attracted to other girls, they would drag me to the altar and try to cast demons out of me. Mm-hmm. That's what happened if you were different. Mm-hmm. So at 20, I married a man, naively thinking it would fix me, right? Mm-hmm. Because to me, I was broken. And it didn't. I stayed married for 10 years, suffered through horrific depression.
Yeah.
Tried to commit suicide. So, and that woke me up. That was my wake-up call. And I said, you can't keep not living like this.
Yeah.
Because you're existing, you're not living. So, fast forward, that was at the age of 30. I'm now 42. I have been divorced and out for 12 years. Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
The last 5 years have had no contact with my family because I realized that it doesn't matter if those people are your blood family. If they are toxic, toxic is toxic no matter who presents the toxicity. It is toxic. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to remove that from the equation to be healthy. And that has made such a transformation for me. And then finding shows like this that help me to see,
Yeah, that there are other people that exist and that are struggling through a lot of these things and that are probably at different phases of that journey. You have I don't hate to even call it a luxury because even though you've had 12 relatively much better years, I know that those years have been a struggle. And I just think about all of the early waste. I mean, you didn't have the opportunity of, taking your sweetheart to the prom, at least not in a way that was meaningful or genuine to you.
We weren't even allowed to go to prom. So that was an abstract concept in every way.
Oh, sure.
Yep.
Even enjoying a basketball game, we weren't allowed to participate in sports, go to games, watch television, movies, hang out with friends at school, participate in clubs. We were literally sequestered in that cult. And so I think the best thing that happened to me was at the age of 31, I lost my job and decided to go back to school, to cosmetology school. And that opened my eyes because I went to cosmetology school and there were at least 7 or 8 gay guys that I went to school with who were just insanely fabulous.
Yeah. And living their genuine life.
Friends. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I realized, you can fucking do this. What's wrong with you? Come on. You can so do this. And so, the bleeding ulcers went away and the fear and the, I lost 30 pounds in 2 months when I first divorced and started the process of coming out.
Yeah.
Bleeding ulcers, unable to eat. It was traumatic. It was very traumatic. But I mean, I wanted to call because a lot of times people think no one understands what I've been through. Mm-hmm. But I have literally been to hell and back and have so much more confidence and strength. And you cannot break me because I will not allow you to have that power over me, right? Because I know what it feels like for people to wield power over me.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's such a beautiful story.
Positive. Yeah, I just wanted it to be a positive, for people listening who feel like nobody understands. And I can tell you the first 7 years when I came out with an explosion after the first relationship. The first relationship for me was great because she was coming out at the same time I was coming out. So we kind of went through that in a gentle process together, which was very therapeutic
Yeah.
for both of us, I think, that we kind of went through that together. But then after that, I was like, okay, reins are off. We are going full tilt, and I did. You know, I experienced it all, and now I'm happy being single because I know my worth. I know my value, and I'm not going to settle just to not be alone.
Yeah, and I am so glad to hear it. I mean, and you talked about I guess the foundation of this being the books that you read and sort of the opportunity to escape in that way. And just to know that there are other people out there living different types of lives. And I know that, you know, certainly there are parents right now that have YouTube blocked on their computers. And that's the unfortunate reality of the world that we live in. But as we increasingly make information available, as the internet continues to democratize and to spread messages like this, you know, we've certainly had folks call us telling us like, hey, I'm in the basement right now. Like, I'm hiding in the bathroom. I am not supposed to be talking to you people. And, you know, I hope that we're doing some small part to offer some light to those hidden folks. And I'm so glad to hear that your story, that you were able to come out of all of that.
And, you know, it has helped so much, I think, in my parenting because I have two sons. One is almost 19, and the other is 16. And my 16-year-old especially, he is so much like me. He has come out to me as bisexual, and I looked at him and said, okay, is that supposed to be like, news? I don't care. All I want is you to be happy with whomever makes you happy, period. And I told him, you know, Kentucky mama here, right? I said, I don't care if it's a girl or a boy. If they're mean to you, I will beat their ass. It doesn't matter. And he was just, you could see the weight fall off of his shoulders. And I can't help but think that has set up a new generation, starting with one person.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
So that when he has kids, if he ever has kids, it's not even going to be a discussion like he felt like he needed to have with me.
Well, you knocked that first like domino over by being accepting.
Yes.
And you're starting a whole chain reaction of wonderful, awesome stuff. And it's happening everywhere. And it's very exciting.
Yeah, it's incredibly beautiful to hear.
And growing up in a state like I live in, which, let's face it, is probably one of the most backwards.
Yeah, in many, many, many measures, that's undeniably true.
I mean, we're still afraid to walk down the street holding our girlfriend's hand. Everywhere in Kentucky, with the exception of maybe, I'm sure you would call it Louisville. We call it Louisville. And Lexington. Those are pretty much the only minimally safe spaces we have.
Yeah.
Anywhere else, you're pretty fearful. So we have a long way to go, but
it's just a good reminder that you're right. There is so much more work to be done, that shows like this exist for a reason, and that, you know, we like to have fun here. We like to talk about some of the like wild and exciting and adventurous kinks and all of the craziness and, you know, to just have a good laugh and all of that. But there's meaningful change that's needed in this world, and we hope to be helping to chip away at it. And so that's why I'm really thankful that you've shared your story with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And at the end of the day, all of us, it doesn't matter what our kinks are, what our preferences are, we're all just people. And I think more and more people are understanding that we are just humans, you know? And I think that is the big change that's needed, is just to be able to look at another person and not see them for the outer superficial display, but to see them as the same beating heart that you have inside you. You know?
I love that.
So.
Absolutely, regardless of where they came from, of who they love, of how they do it, of how many people they love, you know, all of these things. So it's I like to believe that we're building a better world, and I think there's a lot to be excited about, but there's still so much to do.
And, you know, as a stubborn Kentucky woman, they can do it gently or they can do it kicking and screaming, right? Because
Right.
It's
one way or another,
going to get done.
it's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Well,
you guys have a great night.
Yeah, thanks
for
so much.
taking my call.
You-
Absolutely.
as
Thanks so
well.
much for manning the barricade with us.
Yeah.
You have a great night.
Well, I'm here. I am here.
Take care.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, her story resonates.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of that I recognize and that I hear from other people who call, other people who wind up in my office, and just the people that I meet out at bars, because even if we have not had to struggle in the horrific ways of being in a marriage that's a completely wrong fit and these different struggles, we've all been sort of affected by that type of narrowness, that limitation to the type of life that we're allowed to have.
Oh, yeah. No, I was, entertainment in my house was 1940s classic movies, Hays Code era only. And yeah, we didn't get internet in my house till I was 16 or 17 years old. And even then it was, you get to listen to Spotify and that's about it. So yeah, it was a whole new world, discovering the YouTube and all of that cool
Yeah,
stuff. And
yeah, absolutely.
it really very quickly answered a lot of questions for me that I had about myself, that I was like, oh, that's why they didn't want me looking at this stuff, because
Yeah,
those are conversations that aren't okay to have in that world.
It's crazy to think that information would be the type of thing that people would want to put a hold on to, that your parents would want to put a hold on to, rather. But it's obvious why information is so important to control.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, let's print more books. Let's broadcast more podcasts. Let's get it out there. I'm so excited to be, just a small part of the Atheist Experience Network, which is, again, just a small part of what the Atheist Community of Austin does. So it's very exciting. With that, we do have David on the line. If you'd like to jump on with another call.
Yeah, let's do it. Hello, David.
Hello, V and Christy. Thank you for taking the call.
Yeah, absolutely. What can we do for you tonight?
Well, I've got it all going for me. I'm a Yankee living in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
I'm pansexual, and I'm into polyamory and a few kinks.
Nice.
So, and I'm trying to find resources to meet people here. And it's not really easy.
Yeah, I believe that. And, I think to a certain extent, no matter how great our matching apps and our communication tools and all of these things become, that there is a certain amount of beaconing. We've talked a number of times before about how Austin really is that for much of Texas, that I don't know, there aren't good survey numbers or et cetera to discuss how many specifically queer or poly or kinky folks there are in Austin versus the rest of the state. But I do know that there's a high concentration because people flood into these places, and that's not necessarily an option for you. So I definitely hear that. But that said, what have you done in terms of, kind of the first common places, things like Meetup and FetLife and things like that?
Yeah, I've got memberships on both of those. It's just kind of hard to meet people on there if they don't click on you, or if they aren't into the same kinks.
Yeah, I definitely hear that. And FetLife in particular can be for many a incredible community, and for others feel like a awkward, scary meat market. And I think I've honestly had both experiences myself personally. So I definitely hear that. Another thing that comes to mind for me, or that's been instrumental for me, is Facebook groups. I think I'm probably one of those people that would have given up on Facebook the same way I did on MySpace a couple of years back if it wasn't for that opportunity to connect with folks in my community in that way, and honestly to meet a ton of incredibly wonderful people. I mean, some of the folks that we've had on this very show are people that are instrumental in maintaining those communities. Particularly I want to mention Lily Bacon and some of the episodes that she's done talking about how to find those resources, how to find those secret or hidden Facebook groups, and how to find other types of resources. So I might point you towards those episodes of this show, but otherwise I recognize that it can be a challenge. And it most often comes down to finding that first in.
Right.
Not everybody in any community knows everybody else in any community. I mean, that's obviously not the way it works, but usually if you're on Tinder, if you're on Hinge, if you're on Facebook, Twitter, I mean, wherever it is that you're going, if you can just find one person, they can often show you the ropes of a new city or a new area.
Yeah. That's the hard part, meeting that first person.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say dating apps really can be used for this. It's another kind of often overlooked opportunity because that does give you a chance to sort of meet the first one in a lot of ways.
Right. Also, something you might look at, and I don't know exactly where you live, so this might be my city privilege showing.
Sure.
But a lot of times they will
North Carolina.
have certain places that they hang out, you know, or just a place that is known to be, that's the spot where everybody goes and just has drinks or whatever.
Yeah.
So the way you can usually find that is to keep an eye out for maybe kind of subversive or queer events happening at a space. And if that space is putting on that kind of event, it's likely that those people are going to be more accepting and probably have that in. So I don't know how many spaces there are like that in your area.
But if there's a bar that's always having like burlesque shows or always having, that
if they have
kind of thing.
RuPaul's Drag Race on every week, that's a good sign that maybe there's a certain type of crowd there that could give you that in.
Yeah. Well,
And
that sounds like a good start.
Yeah, and all of these things are directions to start walking towards, but I don't want to let you go without just acknowledging that it can be a real struggle, and that I hear a little bit of that defeat in your voice, and I don't dismiss it. Certainly, I have known people that can step off the airplane, walk out of the airport, and all of a sudden find, a dozen people that have the exact same super rare and specific kink that they have. People who are gregarious and that just surround themselves with all kinds of exciting and interesting folks. I myself am not somebody who's going to be great at going to a burlesque show, lingering in the back and chatting somebody up or trying to get into that community. And I recognize how difficult that can be. So I just want to sort of encourage your courage and compliment your bravery as you're going through this process of trying to make the world around you feel more like home.
Yeah. It's not easy moving from the north to the south.
I'm sure.
Yeah, as somebody who loves where I live and has loved living in the South my whole life, I also can only imagine the culture shock and the strain and struggle.
I went from Portland, Oregon to Columbus, Ohio, and that was culture shock. They were like, we have a gay bar. I was like,
the one?
They're like, oh, yes, it's very fun. I was like, okay. Yeah.
It is the best gay. It is much gay. You should go to our bar.
Exactly. Yeah, so I feel that for sure.
Yeah, there's not one of those even near here.
No,
I think there's one within 300 miles.
Well, and I recognize that North Carolina is going to have some of the harshest culture and regulations and just oppression of folks in these sort of marginalized groups. And so I recognize that even putting yourself out there, starting up a Tinder profile that has a picture of your face and a description of, polyamory or pansexual or these different things, could potentially be a dangerous thing to do. I don't know that that's the circumstance for you, and I want to encourage you to be brave, but to also recognize that if you don't feel comfortable, there may be a good reason for that. And so to think critically about whether those fears are rational or irrational.
Yeah. Well, it's also a bit harder because I'm one of those people who is regularly attracted to trans women.
Mm-hmm.
And so
And
not
there's
having
a little bit of a war.
openness of that here.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a war on trans women in North Carolina. I mean, nationally, internationally, really, but a lot of it has been centered around that area for a couple of years now. So we absolutely wish you luck, and I'd love to hear from anybody out in the audience that has maybe spent some time in the area, that knows all the great groups that could be that first connection. If you're in North Carolina and you have some thoughts that I don't know of or haven't thought of or haven't spent time around, please shoot us an email, drop in a YouTube comment. I mean, get that word out there because this is important.
Well, thank you for taking my call.
Yeah, absolutely. And we wish you the best of luck. Thank you so much for being brave and for giving us a call. Take care.
Yep. You too. Bye.
Bye.
You know, there's always going to be certain limitations in the sense of, you can't just walk into a bar and expect to find the love of your life that also loves your favorite TV show, loves your favorite sports team, that loves your favorite sexual position and has all of your kinks. I mean, that's reality. And as our desires get more specific, or as our orientation leads us to minority groups, that struggle is going to be intensified, but it doesn't need to be this way.
Yeah.
I mean, on a planet of 7 billion people, there is somebody who matches your gender preferences, your sexuality, who is a good fit for you. But
I mean, like a soulmate.
Well, I don't know about that. No, not just one. Not just one. There is no the one, as Dan Savage says. There's always the person that we're willing to round up to one.
Right.
And so I do believe that there are plenty of people that would be a good fit for Dave, that he'd be able to round up, but many of them may be in hiding.
Right, exactly.
They're not comfortable expressing themselves, or they've frankly fled the area that he's in because they've been told to by politicians, by actual torch-wielding marches. I mean, there's a lot to be concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
So with that, we do continue to have lines open, but V, I guess I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about sort of the nature of the show and how we even have all of these conversations. I mean, as we think about this show as, seeking to provide normalization, education, entertainment on sexual topics, all of that is put through a lens of positive atheism and skepticism. So just starting there, how do you even define those terms?
Yeah, that's always tricky because everyone does have their own definition for these words, and even the dictionary doesn't give us the right definition, just the most agreed upon.
Yeah, and I love being in Facebook conversations and having people debate the meaning of words and being like, guys, you really could have just opened up another tab and gone to dictionary.com. Like, I simplified this debate for you. But when we're talking about these more awkward-y topics, that's tough.
Well, they're very all-encompassing too. These are very big words, for lack of a better term. I think for me, sexuality as a word sex is so ingrained in culture right now, and always has been. And so for me, sexuality doesn't mean just sex.
Right.
In the same way that when people talk about the gay lifestyle, they're like, oh, it's just, the having sex part is the only gay part. It's like, no, that's not what that means. It means, self-image and attraction and interaction and expression and communication and all of these things that may ultimately lead to sex with somebody, maybe, but doesn't necessarily have to. It's how you go through the world as a human being.
Mm-hmm. And there's even a culture component. I mean, I'll often watch a movie and be like, yeah, it's a very queer movie. And my girlfriend would be like, there was no gay characters. Nobody was having sex with anybody. It wasn't about romance at all.
Thor Ragnarok is the biased movie.
Such a queer movie.
It is such a queer movie. And the only bi character scene that showed she was bi was cut. We know.
Yeah. It just...
we picked up.
There's a vibe. There's a vibe. And again, Here we are talking about vibes and science and trying to like nail some of these things down, which just goes to highlight how tricky these definitions are.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and it's, again, the language we use. Vibe is like energy. Like, that's
Yeah, what does it
I was
actually
just
mean?
absorbing Chris Hemsworth energy through the screen. It's very ethereal. For skepticism, though, like bringing it back to that, the definition for me, and I realize that this is my definition, is just exhausting the list of potential materialist explanations before trying to jump to something that is non-material.
Kind of applying Occam's razor.
Exactly. Okay, so I had an experience. Okay, well, I know I had this experience. Was I too hungry? Had I eaten that day? Had I slept well? Was I emotionally exhausted? Do I have some kind of mental issue that I need to get checked out? Was there... I read this comment once, I think on a previous Atheist Experience comment thread, where somebody was like, I was hearing hallucinations and seriously reconsidering my atheism.
Yeah.
And then I realized I was leaking Freon. And I got it fixed and they went away.
There was like a more practical explanation than leaping to there's an immortal God who is speaking to me.
Exactly. So for me, that's what skepticism is going down that checklist and just making sure that you can check all of those boxes before even starting to assume other things.
Sure.
So yeah, I would say let's go off of the vibes thing for a minute.
Right.
With that, I'm like, well, why am I picking up that this is a queer film? And I was like, oh, could it be that we are taught that certain looks or certain colors or certain aesthetic possibilities are coded to register as, like, subconsciously, this is something that we are doing for you.
Yeah, the position of the camera, the things that it chooses to highlight, all of these subtleties.
Even down to the makeup choices, like, oh, well, this character is wearing eyeliner. That by itself is not something of anything, but all put together, it kind of suggests things. So yeah, I think skepticism is just building that epistemological toolbox and asking why, asking how, before making claims.
Sure.
Yeah. And then I just want to briefly point out, we say positive atheism here a lot at the ACA.
Yeah, I mean, it's built into our mission statement and the bylaws of the organization.
Yeah, and just so the people know, because this has happened a couple times, we're not talking about the philosophical positive atheism, not the yes, we know for a fact there is no God kind of atheism. It's optimistic atheism. It's we don't believe in a God, and that's great because X.
Right.
That X is what we talk about here. That's great because we don't have to worry about being watched by a super creepy old dude in the sky while we're having sex with somebody, you know?
Right, yeah. And that there is no fear of hell, that there is no, that there's opportunity to enjoy this life.
That creepy feeling you get isn't a demon stalking you. That's probably just, to quote Dickens, a piece of old beef.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well, actually. Well, I mean, as we're talking about sexuality, which has all of these bizarre permutations and these fascinating different applications and different pieces, is there sort of like a shorthand, like a smell test or a sine qua non of skepticism, of sexuality, of positivity in your atheism?
Yeah, I think objectively, no. I am just scratching the surface of the philosophy of linguistics right now.
Sure.
But basically that's just why words? Why are words? And I think that for me, it just, as long as I can have a conversation with you about a definition that we agree on, that's enough for me. I don't need to then be able to take that definition and bring it to somebody else, then we can tweak it and come to a different conclusion or another discussion based on our agreed definition of it. So I think that using them functionally as opposed to sticking to one definition regardless of what the other person is bringing to the table is the way that I approach that.
Yeah, so words mean things, but that they are tools. And using the correct word is not as important as getting the job done well.
Right, exactly. So, for example, some of the guests that we've had on lately, I know I was agreeing a lot with what Kevin Garcia was saying during, I think, last week's call. They were using very different words than the words that I would use for the same concepts.
Sure.
But I was able to recognize these are tools that we are using and coming at with different lexicons to describe a very similar thing. And after we've had that conversation about that broad topic that we agree on, then we can talk about the word use. And like,
Sure.
well, what do you mean by this? And would this be considered a better word for it or a better definition?
Well, and it's worth highlighting that that guest in particular, Kevin Garcia, is coming from a very different worldview and perspective, and that we, wanted to sort of scratch the surface on that. We wanted to see a little bit about what it's like on, I don't want to say the other side of the tracks, or perhaps the other side of the aisle. And so I do think that that's interesting that even in the words that we use, there's a real challenge to meet each other in that way.
For sure.
With that in mind, I mean, we're obviously doing this show for a broad audience, for folks all over the world, for the folks that are hiding in the basement or in the bathroom, or or the folks that are, needing a sense of community, that maybe have sort of mastered some of these ideas in some ways, but just want to know that there are people out there with these ideas. But in any case, when you look at the ACA in 2019, where are we sort of missing the boat, taking these ideas of sexuality and skepticism, positive atheism, and like over or underdoing it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that we do have, we're very far along, but I think we do have a lot of work to do. I think a lot of it comes from, there is a very loud subsection of atheists who are very vehemently against discussing things like sexuality, gender expression, anything that has to do with this other side of, the show.
Yeah, so anything outside of basically the lack of a God.
Right. Atheism is this and only this, and everything else should be ignored, and this is what we talk about.
Yeah.
And it does have its place. That conversation is very important. But here's the thing. A lot of Christians don't realize that their entire worldview has been influenced by ancient Greek Stoicism.
Yes.
And that was because Augustine, while he was out doing his thing, was a Stoic for a long time before he came and became a Christian. So he brought a lot of Zeno's Stoicism to the concept of Christianity, and as one of their church fathers, used to be mine, I kicked the guy out, we have a lot of Stoicism in our worldview just ingrained in Christianity. Pleasure for pleasure's sake is wrong. We can't talk about sex, cover up. Like any of those concepts that are in secular culture as well come from that kind of Stoicism.
Yeah, I mean, here in America, as much as we are founded under Christianity, which is a very incorrect
Watch
claim.
last week's episode with Andrew Seidel.
But as much and meaningful as that impact is, we have to talk about John Calvin and a lot of these other great thinkers that are, again, putting the concept of pleasure on the chopping block in so many ways.
And I think that a lot of Christians or former Christians who have deconverted and deconstructed their faith have done so and then stopped. And they were like, I don't believe in a God anymore. I'm logical now. I don't need to go any further.
Right.
But they haven't deconstructed that Stoicism bit. And you need to keep digging, and you need to keep asking yourself, why do I believe this? Why does this make me feel icky? What do I like? Why do I like it? And that goes way, way beyond just the faith component. So I think that we just have a lot of work to do in the atheist community of continuing the process of deconstruction.
So atheism isn't just about, or the brand of positive atheism that the ACA and the Atheist Experience Network and this show are all hoping to put out isn't just about like going through and line item deleting the word God or Jesus or Muhammad from all these different places. It's actually about ripping out root and stem the negative influences, or at least challenging and replacing with better opportunities all of the different ways that religion has affected our lives.
I would say so. I think that you can call yourself an atheist if you haven't deconstructed, but you're not a skeptic if you're not doing that. And searching for the root cause of everything.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly well said point. With that, I mean, as we look forward to the next year of the show, what are the things that you're hoping to offer, to change, to see happen in these spaces?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm still fairly new here.
Sure.
But I've watched the show for a while. I would listen to it all the time back in Columbus, where I didn't have anyone else to talk to about these things. And I'm just kind of hoping that this is a place people can come to start a conversation.
Sure.
Right? I personally am not in a position on this show where I want to deconvert somebody or get someone from point A to point B within the space of a call. We have some people on this network that are amazing at doing that. I prefer to just bump them this way a little bit. Say, okay, this is what you think, or this is the problem that you're having. Why not think about it like this? And then let them call back.
Yeah.
Let them see what happens. But it's a place for exploration. It's a place for challenging assumptions, whether that's sexual or secular.
Yeah, and just embracing a little bit of curiosity.
Yeah.
You know, I think that skepticism, so often we put this connotation of it being very negative, very pugnacious and aggressive, whereas I see skepticism as being sort of curious about the world. How do you know? Why does this work? Could it work better?
I would say that skepticism is just as much what is possible as what is not possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, I mean, obviously all of this is couched in these conversations about pleasure, about sexuality, about, all of love, for instance. Like, none of these things are measurable. And so as we recognize just sort of the flaws in our language, how do we continue to apply skepticism?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of people approach concepts like love or pleasure as not like unquantifiable things, things that are out there somewhere that influence
somehow separate from the
something
material world.
That is either, love will find a way, suggests that like love has agency,
and power,
yeah, and the way that we talk about these things in our day to day, supports those concepts. But really, these things are very quantifiable, and we can measure the impact of actions on the pleasure centers of our brain. And that doesn't make them any less impressive or any less important or any less quote unquote magical. Like you still feel like when you're in love with somebody, like the magic is going to be there.
The experience
whether
of
or
it,
not you think it's like this outside force giving you a hug or, the chemicals in your brain making you do the things you need to do. So the goal is not to define these things out of existence or to lessen them in any way. In fact, I find it's extremely helpful to focus on how do we feel these things and why? Because that helps us to do it more. Like if you know, if I do this and this and this, I will feel pleasure or be able to love a person, then that's great. You've hacked the code, Your brain is just another thing that you get to play with.
And there are limits to how far we can really narrow it down, because you point out that love is like a broad word. I'm very glad you're here on the show. You trigger the dopaminergic action in the D4 receptors of the nigrostriatal pathway by appearing here with us. Doesn't really have the same meaning as we sort of embrace the, it's not magic in some sort of like esoteric sense, but it is a really beautiful thing that's worth getting excited about.
Right, exactly. And then we go back to definitions. They both mean the same thing.
Yeah.
We would define them completely differently.
Well, so to have these conversations, do we have to sort of like suspend our disbelief? I mean, do we have to like delete words like vibe from our lexicon? Or are we comfortable with just sort of acknowledging that they are an imprecise application of something else?
Yeah, I actually, and I don't know if I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, I think suspension of disbelief is important. As somebody who is a writer, an editor, somebody who performs rituals, I find the suspension of disbelief to be super useful in accessing these concepts. think of a roller coaster, right? You get on a roller coaster, you're plunging down a 150-foot drop.
Yeah.
You're suspending your disbelief that you're not going to die.
Right,
you know?
right.
And
you know that you're safe.
You know you're
but that,
safe,
that
but you're
feeling,
still screaming.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
So for me, I think that being able to say, okay, if I were asked, what is love? How does it work? I could probably, give you where it occurs in the brain, what chemicals are involved, things like that, right? But I don't need to do that in order to have a conversation with a random person on the street.
Yeah.
I was talking actually with a Christian friend, and I was talking about how I don't use emotion to come to conclusions about reality.
Sure.
And she asked, so like Vulcan? I was like, no. I think emotion is very useful. And in the same way, I think suspending disbelief in certain circumstances or using words like vibe or love or soulmate even is useful in certain circumstances. But it's not how you come to truth. So like a piano is great at making music, but you don't cook dinner with it.
Sure.
It doesn't mean it's useless. It just means you need to use it for what it's
That's not the
supposed
right
to be
tool
used
for the job.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
No, that makes incredible sense. I'm so excited to hear it.
Yeah.
With that, we do have another caller on the line. Are you ready to talk to Zach?
Let's talk to Zach.
Okay, absolutely. Zach, good evening. How can we help you tonight?
Hey guys. So I've seen a video online, and it was at a Pride rally, and they asked it looked like somebody's dad, and they asked him, how many genders are there? And he says, I don't know. I just got here. And that's very much how I feel about sexuality in general.
Sure.
I was raised in a very small town. In my public, sex ed class taught me a whole bunch of stuff as I go that I'm finding out is just incorrect, not right. So I don't know what I'm missing and what I don't know. Basically, what I was calling in to ask you guys was, is there a book, a podcast, a YouTube series you could recommend that just had like a basic, comprehensive sex ed discussion? You know, everything just from the basic stuff of sex to, bi, trans, queer issues.
Yeah.
Because I just don't know.
No, I think that's a great question, and there are so many good answers. I've found myself in a pretty similar circumstance. I mean, growing up in the rural South or, Texas, however you want to frame that. And having never put a condom on a banana, never having had those types of education, for me, it really sincerely was things like this show and some great other shows like it. I already kind of mentioned the Savage Lovecast, Dan Savage's project, and his writing, of course, is incredibly influential, particularly in the queer community, but not exclusively. Beyond that, there are so many good answers that I am struggling to think of maybe like a singular or comprehensive one. Sex ed can be defined as things like how to avoid STIs, how to use a condom, how to, have certain types of sex in a safe way. And for that, I would really encourage you to look at videos. The Erica Lust and Lust Productions in particular has a great number and a number of different series that are educational in that way without being incredibly difficult to watch. They're not all fascinating. It is a little bit schooly, but they tend to do a particularly good job. So I'd mention their resources, but if you're looking for something or not looking to pay, $10 a video, honestly, there are reasonably good sex ed resources on a lot of porn websites, places like Xvideo and Pornhub. That's not to conflate porn with sex ed, but I will say that unfortunately, so many people have been using porn as sex ed that a number of these companies have started to actually release and curate sex ed videos on their platforms. So in addition to places like YouTube and Spreaker or wherever you're getting your podcasts, I would encourage you to look at some different pornography sites, whether it's Lust Productions, Pornhub, Xvideo. What else comes to mind?
Something that you might want to do, and not as many guys would think of this, I think, as a first stop, but call your local Planned Parenthood.
Yeah,
and
actually.
ask questions. When I first started having sex, I called my local Planned Parenthood every week. what if this happened? Am I pregnant?
Yeah.
What if this happened? Can I get an STI? And they were so understanding and knowledgeable, and they would sit with me on the phone and just go through exactly what was going on, exactly what I should do. It was very, very, very helpful, and it's free.
So that's something I could call and not even visit?
Yeah, you can just call and say, I've got a question about sex. Can I talk to one of the nurse practitioners? And they'll put you on hold, and then whoever's there will answer your questions.
And honestly, they are often going to be a great resource for who are the sex ed classes in town. Like, where are those happening? What's available? You're not just your locally owned, but, of course, we like to highlight that. But in any good or like well-run sex shop in your town is likely going to have resources. Those might be geared more towards specific sex acts, things like BDSM 101, rope play 101, anal 101, how to perform fellatio 101. All of those sorts of things can be really useful. And I think an important thing to highlight is that things will come up as you go. You will have questions. You will seek out answers to those questions. But just going into your sex life, not feeling like you have to have all of the answers.
Yeah.
A lot of the fun of sex is exploring with your partner and finding out things that maybe they know and you don't, maybe things that neither of you know, and getting to watch some of those like cheesy sex ed videos together, getting to, go to a class together and learning these things bit by bit. I don't know that there is anything that's going to jump up and bite you because you didn't know going in. Certainly, I would encourage you to, be thoughtful as you're experimenting with new positions, with new kinks, with new ideas, to be careful about around sexual health and making sure to utilize appropriate safe sex practices and different things. But beyond recognizing your own limitations and not pushing yourself too quickly before doing your homework, I don't know that you're going to find yourself in a position where you're going to break everything because you didn't know the right position to use or the right word or whatever else.
Right. Is there anything you can recommend as far as just knowledge on trans people? Like, I've got a really good friend who's in the process of transitioning right now, and I just would like to know more because, when I was taught, that's just a mental health issue.
Sure.
Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, and it really depends on I guess, the types of questions that you have in many ways. As far as understanding gender, we've recommended on this show a number of times the book How to Understand Your Gender by Meg John Barker, and I think that that's a very simple read and a very good place to start in understanding all sorts of gender questions. For things that are more medically oriented around, what does it look like to have a vaginoplasty? What does it actually look like to have chest contouring or to be on T or any of these types of things, which, again, are not the same thing as being transgender by any means. But as you're looking at trans issues, if you're interested in what medical transitioning would look like, that book wouldn't be the best resource. I'm not sure where I would direct you because it really depends on the types of questions that you're having.
When I started exploring that whole area, I was watching a lot of trans YouTubers who are very bravely and graciously walking us through their transition and what it's like to go through the world as a trans person. So Ty Turner is one trans man that I watch a lot of. Steph Sanjati is a trans woman who is very, she talks a lot about what she's gone through. Chase Ross.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Gigi Gorgeous. There's a number of them, and I'll tell you that I'll go ahead and make sure that these books, some of these websites, and different things are all linked in the footnotes in the comments of the episode. So if you are on YouTube, you can go ahead and check the YouTube comments after we're done here. If you're listening to the podcast version, you can find all of that at valencecounseling.com. We'll have links to this episode as well as all of the different resources and things that we've been discussing tonight.
Yeah, I'd say once you find one or two people on YouTube, if that's the direction you go, who are you like and you watch a lot of, that will start opening up other suggestions that you can look at. I think for me, that was immensely helpful to just see other people talking about their story. Luxander is an amazing non-binary atheist YouTuber. So yeah, there's a whole plethora of people online who are talking about it every day.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, and I'm so excited for you that you're taking these things on, that you're learning these things. And I, regret that you didn't have those opportunities early on. But I would just encourage you that you're not going to get kicked out of bed. You're not going to break anybody or ruin somebody's life because you're not an expert on these things. If you need to learn how to use a condom, if you need to learn how to be cognizant about STIs or about these more sophisticated cultural issues, great. Go out and learn those things. You're doing it, and we're really glad to talk to you. But I hope that there's not a sense that that you're somehow behind, or that you can't catch up, or that there's a problem or something wrong. We hope that you go out confidently and comfortably.
It's less that, I'm worried about bedroom stuff and more of, I just want to be an ally. I just want to know, I want to be able to help out and suggest, because I'm still in touch with a lot of friends from high school, and it's just, I was taught in high school that birth control is basically the same thing as abortion.
Yeah.
So it's like, obviously there's going to be other people who still believe that, and I'm going to be able to say, hey, here's a resource for you to look at more than anything.
Yeah, you know what? And Malcolm Gladwell actually did a recent episode of his podcast, Revisionist History, on that question of how should we define birth control in these different ways.
Oh, my goodness. There's a whole other area of American law and history around birth control.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there is no end to your journey, but I'm excited to hear you're on it. And please feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call back if you find something great you feel like people should know about.
Okay. Thank you so much, guys.
Absolutely. Have a great night.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I love hearing that people are ready to learn and want to know stuff. And just that first step of, I don't know this thing, but I feel like it's important so that I can help someone else.
Yeah.
It's the biggest step in a lot of ways. A lot of people don't even get there. So thank you so much, Zach, for even calling in and asking. That's awesome.
Yeah, and as we pull all of these things together, as we're talking about what this show is good for, and we had a call at the top of the show talking about the importance of things like this for the folks that don't have access to it, and we talked to Zach, who is looking for more information. It's impossible to talk about all of these things without acknowledging sort of the beauty and the power of YouTube. It's certainly flawed in a great number of ways. We were talking a little bit before the show about sort of what their notions of hate speech include, and in some of the ways that they continue to demonize sexuality, continue to demonize queer folks and these different things. But at the same time, as flawed as some of the platforms and different things are, the internet is changing the world, and it's an exciting thing to be a part of. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast right now, you have access to resources and information that I certainly know I didn't have in high school, and that was not that long ago. So I think it's great to be a part of this, burgeoning, interesting world.
It's amazing. I feel very lucky.
Well, I feel very lucky as well, and very lucky to have you here with us. Very lucky and thankful to have everybody out in the audience who is watching us tonight. And thank you to everybody who called in and who's been joining us. Continue to let us know, about the show, about the types of things that you'd be excited to see. If you're interested in appearing with us, if you have a story that you want to tell, if maybe you wanted to call in but didn't feel comfortable, for all of those reasons and more, please feel free to shoot us an email. You can, of course, join our other shows here on the Atheist Experience Network and check out other parts of the ACA, like our Discord and our Facebook. Join us for the Bat Cruise. I mean, it's a full-on community with a hell of a lot going on.
It's awesome. I love it here.
Absolutely. And we're thankful to our producers, our sound engineers, our call answers, to everybody who helps make this show happen, and of course to all of y'all for joining us. So with that, I guess we just want to encourage everybody to go out and give themselves a big old orgasm, or better yet,
give somebody else one.